Hello, chess friends. AI is rapidly growing in modern technology times. Some people argue that AI will take away jobs in the future, but is AI truly cooler and more intelligent than a human being? To find out, I am going to show you the man who can defeat AI in chess. Our last hope for humanity to dominate over AI technology is Garry Kasparov. Of course, this video is for learning and entertainment purposes only, so let's dive straight into the first game. Garry opens with the Sicilian defense, leading to the move c3. It seems Deep Blue had a premonition of the Stockfish chess YouTube channel's advice on the Alepin Sicilian, which wouldn't exist for another 24 years. The aim here is generally to push d4. Garry, ever the strategist, counters with a vital d5 move. It's unusual to bring out the queen early, except maybe in the Scandinavian defense or if you're a beginner aiming for a quick checkmate, but this move prevents white from moving the knight to c3, as capturing one's own pieces isn't allowed, and there's a fun fact for you. White proceeds with d4, black responds with knight f6, white develops the knight, and after bishop g4 and bishop e2, it's trendy nowadays to move the knight to a3, eyeing b5 and then c7, but remember, this was 1996. Back then, the concept of moving the knight to a3 was off the radar, not to mention Stockfish chess was just a 1-year-old and the computer hadn't a clue about such strategies. The game advances with e6, h3, bishop retreat, and then white castles. Garry carries on developing his pieces, maintaining a steady and normal game pace. Next up, we see the bishop move to e3, adding strength on the dark squares. Garry is at a point where he might consider finishing his development and deciding on his castling strategy, but he opts to capture in the center and plays a provocative move, bishop to b4. This move is like throwing down the gauntlet, daring the opponent to push a3. It signals a bold statement: if you develop your knight, I'm targeting it, and I also need to keep the path clear for my queen. Going for bishop b7 would seem too timid. So, Deep Blue moves its knight to c3. The queen retreats, and Deep Blue starts to apply pressure. Garry pulls back to e7, then we see knight to e5 from the computer, ramping up the tactical play and putting Garry's uncastled king under the microscope, questioning the fate of his knight and bishop. Garry takes on e2, the queen recaptures, and then he castles. Things are heating up, and we're transitioning into the middle game with both sides exchanging pawns and pieces. Who will come out on top? Deep Blue plays rook to c1, smartly activating its rook and pressuring Garry's knight, forcing it to make a move. Capturing on e5 leads to a sequence where the computer takes back, targeting Garry's knight and potentially aligning its rook and bishop menacingly on a pivotal square, hinting at the looming danger of bishop c5. However, if Garry repositions his knight defensively, Deep Blue can coordinate its knight and rook to seize a pawn. It might seem reckless, like setting up the bishop to be trapped. But then the rook can swing into action, showcasing the strategic depth of the game. Although the game didn't end with this move, rook to c1 proved to be a powerhouse play, putting the knight in a tight spot and forcing Garry to defend it with his rook. The computer then springs into action, effectively utilizing its knights and bishops, the so-called minor pieces, in an aggressive manner. The bishop targets the pawn on d4 with a move to b6, and the computer responds by capturing on f6. Garry faces a dilemma. Recapturing with the queen risks a knight d7, threatening d2. This forces Garry to compromise his pawn structure, resulting in doubled f-pawns and b-pawns, while the computer has an isolated d4 pawn, a potential target if the board clears up. The computer advances with rook to d1, and Garry plays f5, expanding his control and activating his queen for the center battle. The queens face off with queen e3 and queen f6, leading to the computer's strategic strike with d5, exposing the vulnerabilities of the queenside pawns, which are left unguarded and ripe for targeting. Following some exchanges, the computer makes an unexpected move with b3, sidestepping the immediate gain for a broader strategy. Garry moves his king to h8, the computer captures on b6 with the queen, and as Garry gears up for a counterattack with rook g8, the computer begins to exploit the weaknesses on the queen side. The game progresses with d4, and the knight leaping to d6, putting additional pressure on the pawn at f5. d4 turned out to be Garry's misstep. He should have opted for a rook to d8, a solid, albeit unattractive, defensive move. Instead, His attempt at aggressive counterplay fell short, and the computer quickly debunked his strategy. With knight takes b7, the computer challenges Garry, asking, "What's your plan for this knight?" Garry moves his knight to e5, but after queen d5, the computer tightens its grip, keeping an eye on the advancing pawn and maintaining pressure. Garry finds himself in a tough spot. He tries knight to d3, aiming at the rook, but the rook simply slides to c7. This move, coupled with the earlier queen maneuver, sets up a powerful coordination between the rook and queen. Garry makes a desperate move, but the computer efficiently navigates to a position where it's just one move away from checkmating. Despite Garry's queen sacrifice attempt to set up a checkmate, the computer counters with a check, leading to a sequence where it threatens multiple targets, including the queen. The computer could sequence its moves to capture pieces and continue checking, effectively dismantling any chance of a checkmate by Garry. After knight takes f7, Garry Kasparov resigns following king g7, knight g5, and rook takes h7. He resigns because even a slight glimmer of survival is extinguished by the computer's precise play, eliminating the checkmate threat and maintaining multiple threats. The game concludes with the machine taking the lead in the 1996 match. Moving on to the second game, which we won't fully explore as it spans 73 moves, Garry switched tactics, opting for a strategy focused on long-term play. In this game, Garry plays a reverse Grunfeld, an amusing choice since he typically plays this with black, but now he's executing it with white, gaining an extra move. The opening leads to c4, dc4, knight e5, and by the 10th move. The situation is such that black is a pawn ahead but quite passive. The knight's position is dominant, and the bishop on g2 controls long diagonals across the board. The plan is to develop the other bishop and position the rooks on d1 and c1, putting black in a tight spot. Garry, playing white, regains the pawn with queen takes b7, transitioning into an evenly balanced middle game according to modern engines. Though it appears equal, Garry leans into a long-term strategic approach. The game proceeds quietly until Garry opts to sacrifice the b-pawn to disrupt black's kingside, echoing the previous game's strategy. Despite being a pawn down, white gains strong positional play on the light squares, with the bishop aiming for d5 or e4 to establish an unassailable post. The computer tries to activate its pieces, even at the cost of a pawn, aiming for dynamism with its bishop on c3. Garry captures on b8, bishop to e4 follows, and we see Garry methodically maneuvering, pushing the game towards an endgame. The choice to enter an endgame with opposite-colored bishops might seem to hint at a draw, as often mentioned in chess commentaries. However, opposite-colored bishops can actually benefit the aggressor, since the opponent's bishop can't contest the attacking bishop's influence. Garry meticulously erodes the computer's defenses, seeking vulnerabilities. Eventually, the computer, unable to protect its pawn, concedes it, allowing Garry to create a decisive passed pawn on the outside, shifting the game's balance in his favor. I'd love to delve into each move in detail, but instead, I'll highlight how remarkable this unfolding was. Garry systematically dismantled the computer's defense, securing a second pawn. Before long, he executed trades that clearly tilted the board in white's favor, setting up a scenario where the pawn advance was unstoppable. Marching towards victory, Garry's win evened the score at 1-1. A triumph for humanity. In the subsequent games, they ended in draws. During the fifth game, Garry, with black, offered a draw on move 23, which the deep blue team declined. This decision backfired as they were outmaneuvered by Garry. Heading into the final game with Garry leading, deep blue, playing black, faced Garry's strategic play. Garry opened with knight f3, leading to a queen's gambit transition and a setup known as the Slav, or more modernly, the triangle defense. Garry's knight d2, though seemingly passive, was strategically sound, reinforcing the center and inviting a slow, thoughtful game, despite the computer's initial pawn movements suggesting an advantage. It failed to capitalize due to a lack of strategic depth and an overly materialistic approach. Garry, on the other hand, focused on solid, sustainable positioning, completing his development and opting for a king's castle. As the computer attempted to counter, Garry adeptly repositioned, maintaining control and not overreaching. His bishop's retreat to f1, correcting to b1, aimed to exert pressure on h7. Even as the computer's knight advanced, it couldn't unsettle Garry's setup. Garry's strategy throughout the match was to occupy strong, sensible squares without pushing too hard. allowing the computer to falter under its own flawed strategy. This approach led to the computer making moves that seemed advantageous initially but lacked long-term strategic value, ultimately contributing to its downfall as Garry's pieces dominated the board. When the computer moves its bishop to attack the rook, Garry responds by elevating his rook to d8, and advancing with h4, showcasing not brute aggression but a balanced advance on both flanks. His pawn maneuvers, a3 and b4, exemplify strategic board control that might look amateurish for ordinary players, but for Garry, it's a masterclass in outmaneuvering the computer, with bishop c7 followed by c5. Garry asserts more spatial control, practically squeezing the life out of black's position, which is now confined to the center. His rook moves to e8 and queen to d3, hinting at a mate threat, yet Garry's focus isn't on immediate checkmate. He's sculpting the position, advancing with a deceptive simplicity. Even as he positions his pieces threateningly, Garry recalibrates, pulling the rook back, advancing the bishop, while the computer tries to halt his kingside progress with h5, undeterred. Garry shifts focus with b5, exploiting the board's dynamics and continuously applying pressure. The computer is hemmed in, gasping for space, as Garry refines his position with bishop c2 and knight to c6. His bishop to a4 pins the computer's knight, epitomizing the strategic bind Garry has engineered. The computer's attempted tactics with its queen hanging prove futile against Garry's relentless strategy. He captures, countering with knight d4, leaving the computer paralyzed. The game progresses with queen d7, bishop retreats to d2, and then bishop g5, with Garry maintaining the grip. As rook moves to c8 and bishop to f6, Garry introduces a tactical twist with c6. The pawn is up for grabs, but Garry's queen leap to c5 is the clincher. The deep blue team resigned in a position where, despite the abundance of pieces, they were thoroughly outplayed, a testament to Garry's overwhelming strategy and control, reminiscent of Khabib Nurmagomedov's dominance in the octagon. Showcasing a strategic suffocation that transcends mere positional play, Garry boldly disregarded the conventional wisdom of aligning pawns with his bishop, exploiting the computer's setup with all its pawns on light squares, thus leaving the dark squares vulnerable. His strategic acumen led to a 4-2 victory in the 1996 match, marking a triumph for humanity. Yet, the saga didn't end there. A 1997 rematch in New York City was set, promising another round of intense chess battle. In this rematch, Garry opened unconventionally with knight f3, g5, and g3, hinting at a King's Indian attack with a double fumetto, a strategy not typically associated with him and one that's quite complex, especially for beginners. This setup is less direct, with ambiguous plans, emphasizing a long-term strategic fight. As the game unfolded, Garry maneuvered the queen to e1, escaping a pin and setting the stage for potential pawn advances. Black, with more space, played actively. But Garry's knight h4 aimed at destabilizing the pawns with g4 and f4. When black responded with g5, Garry retreated the knight to f3, encouraging further pawn advances from black and weakening its structure. The match progressed with careful positioning from both sides. Garry's queen moved to c1, and his rook to e1, as both players engaged in a dance of strategic maneuvering. Garry's knight repositioned to f1, aiming for the f5 outpost, a tactical focal point in his strategy. As the game reached a critical phase, the deep blue team, mistakenly referred to as the Alpha Zero team, a nod to a more contemporary AI, faced a crucial decision, to capture or not, weighing the risk of allowing Garry's knight the dominant f5 square. This tension highlighted the match's intricate battle of minds and machines, with each move steeped in deep strategic consideration. The computer decided against giving up its bishops, seeing it as too risky. Garry then pressed forward, making a bold pawn move to g4. After an exchange of pawns and the move f3, black's king's defenses weakened, and an isolated pawn was left vulnerable on h6. Garry moved his bishop back, then cleverly shifted his king with king h1 to avoid any potential traps and ready his knight for action. After some more moves, including bishop g5 and rook e2, aiming to solidify his position and unpin the queen, Garry made a strategic pawn push on the queen's side with a4. Then, the computer made a daring move with f5, gambling on its aggressive strategy. This kind of bold play from a computer usually signals trouble for the human player. The computer pushed forward, banking on its assessment that black had the upper hand. In response, Garry made a surprising move with f4, leaving his rook open to capture, betting that the computer's aggressive pawn push had overextended its defenses. Garry's calculation was that taking the rook directly would leave black's king too exposed due to the advanced pawns. The computer then played knight e5 to try and maintain balance, but Garry's advancing connected pawns near the king spelled trouble for the computer. As the game progressed, instead of aiming for a quick checkmate, Garry opted for strategic simplification, understanding the importance of reducing material on the board to capitalize on his positional advantage. This wasn't about flashy play but securing the win by steadily advancing his position and maintaining pressure. Garry decides it's smarter to trade queens because in the long game, his pawns will become powerful forces. He's thinking ahead, with moves like h5, king g1, and king f8, Garry carefully enhances his position, leading to king g7, then he plays g4, a move that might seem odd at first because it looks like he's losing material. However, Garry knows what he's doing. His bishop is pinning the knight to the king, setting the stage for his pawns to shine once the board opens up, after a series of exchanges. Garry's strategic foresight leaves him with a bishop, 2 pawns, and a rook. While the computer only has 2 minor pieces to defend, the king can't help against Garry's advancing connected pawns, leading Deep Blue to resign. Garry claims the first victory for humanity in this series. In the second game, with Garry playing black, we see the Ruy Lopez opening, a classic battle setup familiar from many historical matches, including those between Kasparov and Karpov. The game follows a well-trodden path with moves like h6, rook e8, and bishop f8, adopting the Smyslov system, named after the legendary Soviet chess master Vasily Smyslov. The game slows down with both players making cautious, strategic moves. Knight f1, bishop e7, and knight g3 unfold on the board. Garry plays a series of subtle, strategic moves, like c5, to expand his influence on the queen side. It's interesting to see Garry choosing this approach, focusing on positional play and careful maneuvering. He's in his element, playing a game that suits his style and preparation. Bishop e3 is played by the computer, aiming to rise to the challenge. Garry responds with knight h4, looking to quickly resolve his positional issues by exchanging one of white's active pieces. Meanwhile, the computer starts eyeing the queen side, pulling Garry's attention away from it. The machine continues with queen e2, prompting Garry to reinforce his queenside defense, but he's faced with the looming threat of b4. Garry must decide, block the position with c4, which could activate the opponent's bishop, or find another plan. He plays queen c7, and the computer lines up with rook c1, possibly gearing up to open the queenside with c4, aiming to exploit the numerical pawn advantage there. Garry, sensing the danger, opts to close the position to prevent the breakthrough. Yet, the computer doesn't relent and initiates a secondary attack, maintaining the pressure. The focus now shifts back to Garry, who is on the defensive. In this tense situation, white plays f4, a strategic move aiming to break through on the king side, metaphorically tying Garry's shoelaces together, so to speak. After some exchanges, white gains a protected passed pawn in the center, an asset that could prove crucial. The queen retreats to f1, then moves to f2, improving its position while also eyeing potential pawn breaks to activate the bishop on the light squares. The game continues with positional maneuvering, including knight to d6 and bishop e6, with neither side committing fully to a plan on the queen side. Eventually, Garry plays knight to f5, leading to exchanges and the move f6, where he decides to hunker down defensively, adopting a come-at-me attitude, reminiscent of Yoel Romero's fighting style, focusing on defense and waiting for the opponent's move. After a series of captures, the board reaches a state where Garry's position is tough, but he's ready to staunchly defend. Okay, folks, here's where things got really interesting. Garry Kasparov set a clever trap with bishop d6, tempting the computer with the prospect of capturing on b6 with its queen. He was betting on the computer taking the bait because, back then, computers usually grabbed material when they could, so, Garry was ready with a plan. If the computer took the second pawn, he would push his pawn to e4, cutting the computer's queen off from the action and sparking some counterplay, despite being 2 pawns down. But, the computer didn't take the bait. It didn't go for the extra pawns and instead kept Kasparov's potential counterplay in check. This move made Garry suspect human intervention. He thought maybe a grandmaster was offering advice or somehow influencing the computer's decisions. Garry was pretty upset, accusing the team behind Deep Blue of cheating, suggesting they might have overridden the computer's choices. I wasn't around to witness all this firsthand, I was just a toddler then, but this moment was huge. It suggested that the computer's strategy wasn't just about grabbing material, it was playing a more sophisticated, controlled game. Although later analysis indicated Garry might have had chances to salvage the game, he resigned on move 45 after rook to a6, feeling overwhelmed by the computer's relentless pressure. In this position, it seems there was a chance to play queen e3, offering up the bishop in a sacrifice that could lead to a draw, highlighted by the astonishing move rook to e8. This move would keep the queen on e3 in a threatening position, ready to capture the bishop or deliver checks, while effectively controlling the e-file. It's a complex scenario that even modern computers might struggle to conclusively evaluate. The move bishop e4, played in the game, may have caught Garry off guard, leading to his surprise and eventual defeat as the computer made a strong comeback. After 3 more drawn games, the match was evenly poised. In the decisive 6th game, Garry, with the black pieces, unexpectedly opted for the Caro-Can defense, a choice that was out of character for him, signifying a strategic surprise. Following the classical variation, the game developed into a complex battle. The computer's knight g5 aimed at potential sacrifices, adding tension to the position. Garry's e6 and subsequent moves were leading towards standard development plans, including castling and playing h6 to challenge the intruding knight. However, in a crucial moment, Garry deviated from the expected bishop e6, choosing instead to play h6 directly, a move that aimed to resolve the immediate threat but also signaled a significant strategic decision in the match. Garry Kasparov played h6. A move he knew was risky because it opened up the possibility for the computer to sacrifice a piece for a pawn, a strategy not typically expected from computers at the time, as they were not known for understanding the long-term impact of such sacrifices. Garry likely thought the computer wouldn't have such a tactic in its repertoire. After playing h6, Garry continued with queen e7, creating a pin against the knight. The computer, undeterred, proceeded with the sacrifice, leading to a complex sequence where Garry's king ended up in a precarious position. Despite the computer's piece sacrifice, it gained significant activity and control, putting Garry in a tough spot. Garry's move to queen e7, followed by king e7 after the exchange, was part of his strategy to manage the immediate threats. However, the computer's play, particularly bishop f4, kept Garry's king uncomfortably in the center, unable to safely castle. Garry's attempt to create counterplay with b5, a move not previously recorded in high-level play, led to immediate repercussions. The computer responded with a4, quickly challenging Garry's pawn structure. Garry then aimed to activate his bishop with bishop to b7, but the computer continued to intensify the pressure by bringing more pieces into the attack. With Garry's knight moved to d5, he tried to counter the computer's bishop, but after some exchanges, the computer maintained the pressure. This unexpected turn of events, with the computer trading when it seemed advantageous for Garry, showcases the complex and dynamic nature of the match. In the decisive moments of the game, the computer demonstrated its strategic prowess. Queen d3 attacked Garry's pawn, which he defended. But this move highlighted the vulnerability of his e6 pawn and the overall power of the computer's rook. The computer then played c4, a move that effectively opened up the board, putting Garry's position in dire straits. The turning point came when the computer pinned Garry's pawn to his queen, leading to an exchange that further weakened Garry's defenses. With the subsequent push of the pawn to c4, the computer dismantled Garry's queenside, leading him to resign on move 19 in the final game of the 1997 match. This defeat marked the first time a computer had beaten a world champion in chess, symbolizing a significant moment in the history of artificial intelligence. The evolution of computer intelligence in games has been remarkable. Initially, computers like Deep Blue relied on brute force computation to analyze millions of positions. And don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Bye bye, take care, see you soon.